Hard Boiled is an iconic 90s action film written and directed by legendary Hong Kong filmmaker John Woo. The film stars Chow Yun-fat and Tony Leung as two leads supported by a fantastic cast including Anthony Wong, Philip Chan, Teresa Mo, and Philip Kwok. It's an action extravaganza from start to finish, and I consider it to be one of Woo's best films to date. It's certainly up there in terms of action films overall. The film contains many of Woo's signature styles, such as slow-motion gunfights, dual-wielding firearms, and over-the-top bullet spray and explosions. The story starts with Detective Tequila Yip, played by Chow Yun-fat, working an undercover operation on the hunt for gun runners at an old tea house in Hong Kong. During the course of the operation, a gunfight breaks out during which all criminals are killed, as well as his partner and friend Benny, played by Bowie Lam. We are then introduced to Superintendent Pang, who is incensed at the fact that Tequila's shootout has ruined his investigation and sent another cop to his grave. It is also revealed that one of the suspects killed in the shootout was a deep cover officer who is mourned in secret by Pang and his file destroyed. We then cut to mysterious gangster Alan, played by Tony Leung, who assassinates a fellow gangster for betraying their boss. Upon investigating the crime, Tequila is able to find the murder weapon but doesn't have much else to go on. Alan's full intentions are unknown at this point, as we see him in talks with rival crime boss Johnny Wong, played by Anthony Wong, who is looking to recruit him. When outside, Tequila confronts Johnny Wong and we get the first encounter with our two main characters. Afterwards, Tequila is told Johnny is planning to raid Uncle Hoy's warehouse by his informant Foxy, but is ordered by Pang to back off the case. Being stubborn, Tequila crashes the warehouse raid on his own and ends up in a standoff with Alan. Tequila pulls the trigger, but it turns out he's out of bullets and at the mercy of Alan. For some reason, Alan spares Tequila and runs off. Suspicious that Alan is really a deep cover officer, Tequila tries to get answers from Pang to no avail. However, his informant comes through for him again and gives Tequila the location of where Alan lives. Tequila ambushes Alan on his boat and asks more about who he is. Remarking on the origami, Alan responds by stating he hates making origami, but he makes one for every person he kills. Tequila suggests working together to bring down Johnny Wong. They are then interrupted by Hoy's surviving men, and Alan is injured during the fight. He is then taken to Johnny's hospital, which secretly houses his weapons cache in the basement. Tequila and Alan then call for police backup whilst they search the hospital for the weapons cache. Johnny, now aware of Alan's true identity, attempts to kill the cops, the patients, and destroy the hospital in a deluded sense of winning against all those who oppose him. A massive gunfight occurs across the hospital as the police attempt to evacuate and save the patients. The final standoff sees Alan taken hostage by Johnny in front of the hospital, asking Tequila to humiliate himself for all to see. Alan decides to sacrifice himself so that Tequila can get a clean shot on Johnny, dispatching him and ending the siege. The scene fades to Pang destroying Alan's file with Tequila, and whilst Pang appears saddened, we see Tequila smile. We are then cut to a shot of Alan on his boat, who has survived the events of the film. It is here where we see Alan ridding himself of all of his origami, smiling at the fact that he can now disappear and live in peace. Hard Boiled is one of John Woo's final heroic bloodshed films, before departing to the United States, where he would make his first US production, Hard Target, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme in 1993. The idea of Hard Boiled was in response to producer Choi Hark's displeasure of one of Woo's previous films, The Killer, a film deserving of its own video, which arguably glorified a hitman, so for this film, John Woo wanted to instead glorify police, with the desire to make Chow Yun-fat into a Clint Eastwood/Steve McQueen type character. Before there was even a script, the very first action sequence involving the tea house was shot. The production was made aware that this iconic tea house in Hong Kong was going to be shut down in a week, so they made their way over and shot the scene before the building was demolished. This allowed them to cause as much destruction in the tea house as they wanted, without having to worry about repairs or concerns the owner of the tea house may have had. Electricians were literally on the set waiting for them to complete the last few shots so they could turn off the power to the building. The initial plot that was conceived for this film was a story about an evil villain who was poisoning babies. While it was apparently based on real events, it was changed due to being too evil. Woo himself stated that he didn't want Tony Leung to be seen as such an evil person to the public, nor did he want to influence a copycat. Meanwhile, producer Terrence Chang mentioned that this particular storyline turned off his Western contacts, possibly impacting on future potential projects in the United States. As Woo was looking to make films in Hollywood soon, they decided that it would be wiser to come up with a story that was much more palatable to a larger audience to help with international appeal. The story was switched and script writer Barry Wong was brought on to rewrite part of the story, mainly parts focusing on the antagonists. Now, Barry Wong has written many iconic Hong Kong films such as Dragon Lord, Yes Madam, She Shoots Straight, Eastern Condors, and Twin Dragons, just to name a few. Honestly, go and check out his resume. Unfortunately, Hard Boiled would be one of the very last films he would work on, as he passed away during production of the film, leaving 2/3 of the script unfinished. Determined, Woo had to push on and would often write dialogue on the day of shooting. Being a writer himself, he was still able to write dialogue completely in step with what Barry Wong had started with. At the end of the film, you will see that this film is dedicated to his memory. When it came to casting, Woo had intended Tony Leung's character to be an antagonist. But when they switched the story, they also switched his character to be that of an undercover cop. In order to get into the role, Tony Leung isolated himself from most of the production crew and kept his interactions minimal, staying in character with his lone wolf style on-screen performance. Tony Leung is a performer who can really tell a story with his eyes. Accented Cinema did an incredible video discussing this topic, and I would highly recommend that you check it out. In short, he has this way of conveying so much feeling and emotion just from his eyes alone. You see this in spades watching Hard Boiled. Having him play the part of the undercover was such a brilliant idea, as the conflicted nature of the character is seen throughout the film, and it lets the audience know exactly how he is feeling, and the stress he is put under having to live this life undercover. When it came time for him to portray his former boss, Uncle Hoi, you can see how much he is distressed by this choice. This conveys that yes, while he is a cop and these people are criminals, it means betraying someone who has treated him like family. Co-star Philip Chan, who plays his handler Superintendent Pang, praised Tony Leung's portrayal of the character. Philip Chan was actually a former police officer who coincidentally was in charge of undercover cops in Hong Kong himself. He praised not only the writing, but Tony Leung's performance as realistic to what he himself had experienced on the job. When filming the scene on the rooftop that would later influence Andrew Lau's Infernal Affairs, Philip Chan stated that when he was looking at Tony Leung's eyes, he was influenced in a way that made him feel like his son. And although not an emotional scene, carried this feeling that he knew that there was an impending doom to fall upon Tony's character, but he was powerless to help. In contrast to Leung, we have Chow Yun-fat's character. Chow's character is much simpler. His motivations are known, and he is a determined, hard-boiled cop. Much like characters he's played in previous John Woo films, he is proficient with his weapons, cool, and he glides on a lot of surfaces. Chow has been described by cast and crew on many of his films as a happy, lovable, and caring person in real life, quite the opposite to the roles he often finds himself in when it comes to action films. He is able to channel this cool and tough persona on screen and become one of the most dangerous men on the planet when you put 2 Berettas in his hands. Now, according to producer Terrence Chang, Chow did express some concern over his character potentially being just a one-note hero. Turns out there was an entire subplot written for the film that explored his relationship with Teresa Mo's character. This was removed as the film was already getting too long, so Chow Yun-fat created the idea of having the bartender character as a mentor to give some more depth to his own role. He suggested having John Woo play the bartender, hedging that Woo would most likely keep these scenes in the film. Anthony Wong gives us a very ruthless antagonist in the film. Coincidentally, he would go on to star in Infernal Affairs alongside Tony Leung. Early on in his career, he was known to take on more villainous roles, most notably in Ebola Syndrome and The Untold Story. He is often talked about being typecast in films early in his career. Being a Chinese-English mix, he dealt with a lot of racism inside and outside the industry. Back then, he didn't have many options available to him, so he had to take on these roles. Now, whilst he plays the villain role really well, the movie still needed a bad guy that could bring the action and square up with our two protagonists. And sure enough, we have the character Mad Dog. This role was created on set specifically for martial artist and stuntman Phil Kwok, who also serves as the film's stunt coordinator. Woo and Kwok worked together on a previous film, One's a Thief, and Woo had a lot of respect for him. Phil Kwok had achieved fame in Hong Kong back in the 70s as one of the Venom Mob, a group of martial artists that appeared in a number of films, most notably The Five Deadly Venoms. One of the other Venoms, Lo Meng, also has a role in Hard Boiled as Lonnie. Apparently, Michelle Yeoh was meant to star, but due to scheduling conflicts, the role went to Teresa Mo. Because parts of her story were removed from the script, we don't get to learn too much about her character. We still receive hints of what once was, with the interaction she has with Tequila in the film. I rather liked her character, so it's a shame that we don't get to see more of her. Originally, the film was meant to have a more serious and gritty tone. Woo stated his original intent was to shoot everything straightforward and move away from things he had done in the past. This meant doing away with stylish action sequences, cop and killer montages, and possibly even those over-the-top blood squibs. But when he arrived on set and they started shooting, John said that he couldn't help himself. When describing the making of this film, John Woo said it was like being in hell. Even though he had a lot of control over the film, the sheer number of shots required were exhausting. The shooting was beset by noise complaints by residents and constant visits from the triads asking for protection money. For the hospital scenes, the crew were working 20 hours a day minimum, and crews would swap out every 9 hours to allow each team to rest. Only John and his DP were working the full 20 straight. The windows of the hospital, which was actually an abandoned Coca-Cola factory, were blacked out so that they could film at any time of the day and it would still be nighttime in the movie. The crew slept on the hospital set and would often lose track of whether it was day or night outside. Now, the cast weren't spared either. Phil Kwok almost had the back of his head toasted in this scene. Tony Leung caught a piece of glass in the eye during one of the shootouts, which almost blinded him. And this sequence originally had the explosive activate once Chow Yun-fat had left the frame. Woo thought this didn't look dangerous enough, and so on the second take took over the explosive controls, setting them off earlier than Chow expected. The reaction and urgency in Chow's performance is genuine, as he literally ran for his life, tossing the gun in the process. This resulted in the back of his hair getting singed by the flames, and Chow yelling at producer Terrence Chang afterwards. At the end of it all, Chow was happy that they got the shot in the end. John Woo stated that he rarely uses a second unit. He as a director likes to film not only the principal work, but create the action sequences as well. Having a background in dance in his younger years, Woo draws on this to create not only a kinetic rhythm in his action sequences, but also a stylish flair to the combat. You'll often see his shooters spin, twist, and dive, which are often movements Woo designs and tests out himself as a form of on-set improv previs. The film was also shot in order, which allowed Woo to have a benchmark each time they shot an action scene. This would allow them to make subsequent action shots better than the previous. Although rarely used, Woo would find that he did need to use the second unit during the shoot in order to stay on schedule. Whilst he was inside filming the action sequences and gun battles, he had a second unit shooting exterior shots and sequences simultaneously. Terrence Chang describes John Woo as a man of excesses. This translates to his action scenes, probably what makes them such an incredible spectacle. When a gun battle breaks out, destruction, sparks, and blood squibs envelop the frame. The film's editor, David Wu, stated in an interview that John gave him so much footage at times it was almost too much. He jokingly remarked if he wanted to, he could cut 4 different versions of every single sequence. On the other hand, it gave him so much to work with, including multiple angles of the same shot filmed both in real time and in slow motion. He would often find himself reluctantly dropping angles just to shorten the length of the film. As the production went on, John asked if there was any way to speed up this process. Most on-screen kills in the film show the gun firing in one shot and then the subject getting hit in the next. David Wu referred to this as ping-pong editing. He suggested in order to make things easier, John would need to have less cuts and more people dispatched in a single wide shot. This would also help ease the burden of doing constant setups. This idea was eventually built on and became the iconic one-take scene. The one-take scene in Hard Boiled is a testament to every single person working on that set. There is so much action, so many bodies, so much destruction, the coordination alone is incredible. Not to mention, the elevator doesn't go anywhere. That's right. When the elevator doors closed, the crew had 20 seconds to clean up and rearrange the scene on the other side of the doors, and set up for the quote-unquote second floor. Now, according to an interview, David Wu stated that the very first take was ruined because the doors would not stay closed. It was operated by a crew, but it had a malfunction that caused the doors to continue opening and shutting. John Woo's demeanor at this point was that of defeat. According to the crew, he looked like he just wanted to give up. But they really rallied behind it and encouraged him to get this shot, expressing, "This type of thing has never been done in Hong Kong film before." This gave Wu the strength to keep trying the shot, and on the 4th take, they did it. It remains as one of the best single takes ever filmed, and it's one of those rare moments in film I break the immersion from screen and think about the camera operator, the effects supervisor, and the countless stuntmen waiting for their cue to get shot up. In a very recent interview Tony Leung did with GQ, he remarked that during this take, his character charges forward ahead while shooting, and he turned around and saw Chow Yun-fat had slipped over in some fake blood, but he had to get up quickly and push on as not to ruin the take. The score was composed by Michael Gibbs, and I love his work here. I have never heard any of his other works, as the films he has scored I just have not seen. But the moody saxophone is almost typical of sad moments in action films of the day, so they fit right in. The action sequences have this sort of steel drum melody which reminds me of Commando. Because this film was produced by John Woo and Terrence Chang, John had a lot more control over the film overall. This allowed him to use jazz music, which he was prevented from doing on The Killer. Having Tequila also be a musician was inspired by a real-life cop that Woo had interviewed while researching for this film. The cop he spoke to was apparently a very talented drummer, however he switched this into a clarinet for Tequila and gave the drums to his partner Benny. Now, I don't have any definitive information on this, but it is rumored that early screenings of the film contained what was described as a more haunting soundtrack. However, they did not have the rights to the music, so it was changed to what is now in the finished film. Hard Boiled has been a major influence on Hollywood action films. It was John Woo's ticket to Hollywood. The style of action was right in line with what American audiences wanted at the time. After Hard Boiled, Woo had a slew of action films which he directed in America, such as Hard Target, Broken Arrow, Face Off, Mission Impossible 2, Wind Talkers, Paycheck, and most recently, Silent Night. His films are a thrill to watch, which can be boiled down to the stories infused with great action. The gun battles are symphonic and brutal, the emphasis on stunt performers taking a really good shot is reminiscent of Jackie Chan's earlier works with martial arts. Jackie Chan's fights often contain speed and impressive acrobatics, and if the movements and attacks are the words to his choreography, the reactions and falls are the exclamation marks to the end of his sentences. This is how I see John Woo's brilliance in shooting action. It's not just about how cool your protagonist looks whilst firing his guns, it's also about how good your stuntmen look when taking their shots. Many older violent films make use of this technique to give a more visceral and impactful feel to the violence. And oftentimes this leaves the audience with a sense of amazement. For the most part, this style of editing is missing from his American films, which opt for a less graphic depiction of violence. And while the gunshots and the body cam may still be high in these films, the punctuation marks, so to speak, are missing. The exception to this being Hard Target, which feels like the most John Woo Hollywood film to date. Meanwhile, John's storytelling and dialogue aren't often static shots. These scenes sometimes contain movement, panning, and tracking. Not only do some of these shots give you an understanding of the set's layout, but also in scenes like the tea house, it's illustrating a focus on their casual conversation in the middle of a stakeout. It's building character and tension. Even as the dialogue is running, we are also subtly getting fed information as to this suspicious character in the corner. There is often a push-pull relationship between the two lead male characters, and a certain level of tension is used to build up the moments before a gunfight, whether it's through a standoff or the expressions in the characters' faces. This is heightened by the closeness of the lead characters, with them often having the feel of a somewhat homoromantic relationship, something that's been explored before in some of Woo's films. The influence of Woo's work can be seen in The Matrix, John Wick, The Replacement Killers, Desperado, and even some of Quentin Tarantino's works. This film in particular was a huge inspiration to Infernal Affairs, which was then remade in the US as The Departed. At the time of writing, there are only a handful of ways to watch Hard Boiled legally online. The price on some of these original editions can be high, but I have noticed within the last month at least, a few other versions entering their way into the market, which has driven the price down of some other Blu-rays. Depending on your country of residence, you might be able to rent it off Amazon or Apple TV. As for those holding out for a new HD or 4K release, this also looks doubtful at this stage. In an interview with Collider about his latest film, Silent Night, Woo wasn't hopeful that we would see a 4K remaster of his classic films, including Hard Boiled. He did try, but he and the original production company no longer own the rights to these films. They have ended up with another company, and it appears that they are just sitting on these licenses. When it comes to other depictions, there weren't any sequels filmed for Hard Boiled. The Last Blood, Hard Boiled 2 is related in name only, and the Hard Boiled 2 title was only used in some international markets. Now, there was a sequel. It was created in the form of a video game in 2007 called Stranglehold. This was created for 7th generation consoles, the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. The game stars Chow Yun-fat, reprising the role of Tequila using his likeness and voice. The mechanics are rather unpolished and the combat a bit too stiff for my tastes. Those lucky enough to get their hands on the collector's edition would have also gotten the movie Hard Boiled on the disc. If you're interested, you can pick up a DRM-free version on PC at GOG.com for pretty cheap. For my money, the true hard-boiled experience can be found in the game series Max Payne. With slow motion, dual wielding, and dives, you can see the inspiration flow in the game's combat mechanics. You can crank this experience up to 11 by installing the Chow Yun-fat mod for Max Payne 2. This not only replaces Max Payne with Chow Yun-fat, but it gives you access to a number of outfits worn by Chow in many of his films. You'll also be treated to gun sounds and music found in A Better Tomorrow, as well as a special level that mimics the church from The Killer. All in all, Hard Boiled is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement. Studios will rarely fund such a violent action epic nowadays. Apart from some outliers, it's not going to bring in the money. For John Woo's latest film, every cinema that had a showing within 100 kilometers of me did a single session on one day only. Hard Boiled was also funded for around $4.5 million, and some of the lower budget films today can cost around $20 million to produce. Obviously, some films can be made for much less. Not only that, but safety standards and unions have changed the industry to allow better safety and treatment for their crews, which is certainly a good thing, but conditions that weren't around during the filming of Hard Boiled, allowing all involved to push the boundaries just a little bit. The landscape of Hong Kong filmmaking has also changed in the last 30 years, opting to take on a more big-budget Hollywood approach. Guerrilla filmmaking and grittier, audacious films seem underappreciated, and while I won't go into too much detail here, I may cover this in a video in the future. It's sad that the licenses for Hard Boiled, The Killer, and A Bullet in the Head are currently with an entity that just doesn't want to do anything with them, either out of sheer ignorance or perhaps milking the fact that they may be sitting on a potential goldmine. As time goes on and as John Woo gets older, I hope we get to see a remaster in the future. But even if we don't, John Woo can take solace in the fact that he provided generations worth of audiences, with a collection of some of the most exciting, explosive, yet moving films ever created.